most consequential and the most dangerous mistake in history.
Be careful raising a baby tiger, because one day it will grow up and eat you.
What's the cure for the CCP virus?
Long economic difficulties might be with us, and what they might look like if things continue to go in a darker direction.
So we're now in a period of stagflation, meaning lower growth and higher inflation. The darkest period is that inflation persists, heads to 9%. People start worrying that it's going to go to 10%. And next thing you know, we end up in a recession. And that would be tragic if that were to happen. Because again, it is the most vulnerable segments of the population that get hit hard. What's the best is that the Fed regains control of the inflation narrative, and we have what's called a soft landing. Inflation comes down without us sacrificing growth too much. Unfortunately, the balance of risks is tilted in a negative way right now.
Let me ask you about stagflation, a word we hear a lot. Feel free to define it a little bit more, and let me ask you this question. I thought that stagflation included also a piece of high unemployment. We don't have high unemployment, so why isn't that a possibly bright sign?
Oh, that's a really good sign. We have a strong labor market, and that's what's keeping us away from a recession right now. That's why a recession is a risk scenario, not a baseline. The one bad thing about our labor market is that we don't have enough labor force participation. We don't have enough workers. We have twice as many jobs that are open that there are workers. And what we need is more workers entering the labor force. That would help tremendously with our economic outlook.
In terms of options, we've talked about the Fed. What other policymakers or areas of help might come to fix the economic situation that America faces?
So number one is, as we talked about, the Fed regaining control of inflation. Number two is focusing more fiscal support on the most vulnerable segment of the population. Number three are what we call restructuring measures, increasing productivity and labor force participation. And finally, let's not forget about financial markets. The last thing we want is financial instability to undermine economic prosperity. So we need more focus on financial stability.
Can I ask you just about the labor force participation piece? What does that mean exactly?
So, for example, better childcare would encourage more women to come back into the labor force. Retraining and retooling would allow more people to re-enter the labor force. We have the people, they are just out of the labor market, either by choice or by necessity, and anything we can do to re-engage them is a win-win.
All right, Mohamed El-Erian, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to be talking to you again. I'm
perpetrators of mass shootings about 5 years ago. And our goal was to try to understand, where is this coming from? Why are we seeing this increase? And who are these perpetrators? So we built a database that includes 180 perpetrators who killed 4 or more people in a public space, going back about 50 years. And we coded each of them on over 200 pieces of life history information to try to look for patterns in the data. And we also conducted interviews with perpetrators themselves, people who knew them, victims and experts in the field, to really try to add some data and analysis to understand where this is coming from and what we can do to stop it.
So, Dr. Densley, what composite were you able to come up with, or were you, based on all of these data, in terms of what the typical mass shooter is like?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are searching for a profile of a mass shooter, and we instead saw a pathway to a mass shooting, and we outline that pathway in our book called The Violence Project. So it starts with early childhood trauma. Many of these mass shooters have experienced some pretty horrific things in life, early in life, and this is unsettled, unresolved trauma that I think comes back later in life and is part of what we describe as being a crisis point in these people's lives. Mass shooters are in crisis. These are individuals who are not living their best selves. They are questioning their place in the world. It's often a very sort of suicidal crisis. We see a lot of overlap between suicide and homicide in these cases. A mass shooting is intended to be a final act. And with regard to that, people who perpetrate mass shootings are searching for answers, meaning in life. And so they go searching for the other mass shooters who've done these types of crimes previously. They identify with those individuals. They get radicalized in chat rooms online or reading the manifestos of these individuals. And then finally, the sort of last step with this is access to a firearm. And that's where we spend obviously a lot of time in the policy conversations, but we see all four of those steps as opportunities for intervention. They're inflection points, and they're places where we can intervene and prevent a mass shooting. And that's really the key here.
So, Gillian Peterson, one of the things you've written is that to change the mindset about the way we think about these shooters, that they are us. So how does that help in these moments of crisis? Where, for example, would you seek a policy intervention if you change that mindset, if that's the first step?
Yeah, I think we tend to think of the perpetrators who do this as just these evil monsters kind of lurking out there. And of course, what they do is monstrous. But before they do it, they are our classmates, our nieces or nephews, our neighbors, their children going to the school. These tend to be insiders, not outsiders. So the most likely perpetrator of a school shooting is in the classroom. And when we recognize that, I think it kind of shifts our mindset to make us start noticing some of these signs of a crisis, to notice when people are leaking their plans or talking about this kind of violence or talking about suicide. And so our research really points to things like suicide.
Some of these mass shootings that have occurred, that we have documented in the database, and that they would ensure that these firearms are not falling into the wrong hands. Time and time again, we see these are individuals who are in crisis. So something like the red flag laws that are being discussed right now, for instance, are really quite interesting, because if this is a person in crisis, that's not the time that they should be going out and purchasing a firearm. And this would put a temporary restriction on someone's ability to do that. And again, it's just temporary, but it gets them the help they need so that they're not using that gun for the perpetration of a mass shooting or any other sort of situation.
Gillian Peterson, you studied the shootings where things went wrong. What about instances in which someone was stopped before one of these mass shootings? What have you learned from that?
Yeah, we also studied cases where somebody planned to do a mass shooting and changed their mind. Even cases where the perpetrator actually went into the school with the gun in his backpack and didn't fire it. What's interesting about these cases is time and time again, it seems to be a human connection, just a bit of hope that gets the person through that crisis point. It's somebody reaching out and connecting with them. I think it's so important that we're talking about, gun control and threat assessment and these bigger policies. But then at the end of the day, sometimes it's literally just a human connection with another adult or another person that can get them through the moment.
All right, we've run out of time.
Way out there on the other side of the world. And I know China is just at the beginning right now, but this is really a first step for them. And especially if they can start bringing fifth-generation fighters into the fold, too, to combat the U.S. F-35s that are currently carrier-borne. They'll be a formidable opponent, but it's still in the early stages right now, and one carrier is not going to make a difference, as opposed to, the United States, which operates much, much more.
The question to consider is, what are your speculations as to why the delay happened? And you mentioned some of them, but I just want to get a full take from you on this.
To move freely throughout that region. So I think this is just a way of China, again, projecting its power and showing the world that, hey, we're not that far behind you. I think, for a carrier of this size, there's only a few nations that have operated catapult-launched aircraft, the United States and France. So this is a big deal just in terms of the history of aircraft carriers. The majority of the carriers are the ski jump, which limits the type of aircraft that can operate off of it. So what this carrier does is it's going to try to level the playing field for China. It's going to enable them to compete with the U.S. in terms of aircraft and airspace dominance, because their fifth-generation fighters eventually are going to be able to fly up these carriers and then face our fifth-generation fighters, like the F-35.
Michael Chizik, thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Her decision to compete for Team China in the 2022 Winter Games as an American-born skier now comes right back to her, as her flip-flop seems to be that she is now going to join the United States as an ambassador of some sort to bid for the next US-held Winter Games. However, it is later revealed that the official committee hasn't decided on what role she will play or what her title is. And this news has angered some nationalists in China for her flip-flop loyalty. In a sit-down with Time 100, Eileen Gu talks about bringing globalism and inspiring young girls through her actions, dodging questions and answering the lack of answering for the geopolitical question about the US and China. Now, when she was asked about her US-China switches, she says messages on her social media inspire her, galvanizes her to be exact, and, quote, to break my own boundaries, according to some of the stories she's getting. And I guess if you call a two-faced approach breaking boundaries, well, then everybody ought to be breaking boundaries. Will she compete for Team USA next time around in Salt Lake City, or go to Team China if the reward the Chinese government offers is higher? Well, it's unlikely China will hold another Olympic event soon, so now the investment from Eileen Gu seems to come back to the United States, and most people who are not actually mad that Eileen Gu is trying to influence people through her sport, but they're actually mad about what she has done through, I guess, is the manipulation of the supporters of her in both countries to enhance her personal voice, but then at the same time blur her position on it, putting the US-China relationship as one of the chip to gamble on to her advantage. And Eileen Gu really shot to stardom in China by winning 2 gold medals and a silver at this year's Beijing Winter Games, and her success was a soft power coup for Beijing, prompting Chinese leader Xi Jinping to mention her by name at an award ceremony in April. And after attending that award ceremony, Gu flew back to the United States to attend Stanford. And this was all under the context of speaking on behalf of the Chinese government during the 2022 Winter Games, where she attempted to whitewash China's internet firewall on Instagram, saying, quote, anyone can download a VPN, it's literally free on the App Store. Her comment sparked controversy among Chinese and Western viewers, as China does not actually allow VPN usage under normal circumstances, unless you're one of those foreign spokesperson for the Chinese government to start bashing people on Twitter. And
China has not become more democratic. It has not become more peace-loving. And it has not become more Western.
They steal our technology. They extort our businesses who try to open up and work and have access to their markets. And at every turn, they're working against and undermining our way of government and our way of life.
And the United States needs to defend itself because China is propagating this narrative.
I die to my flesh. This is his last breath. I put it to death. So Jesus, just manifest what's left. The victory's in you and you don't won the contest. And I'm free, free to be me, free from the enemy. So flee all the sin in me. For infinity, flee all the sin in me. For infinity, and it feels good to be free. So free, free to be me, free to be me.
Hey, inflation, how you doing there, buddy? You hanging in there? Yeah, ain't got no other choice, do you?